That's not going to work. That's First Timothy. All right, John chapter 5. I think we got to about verse 5 last week. Brother Aaron, would you pray us in, please? Yeah. Amen. John chapter 5, starting verse 5. And there was a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lie and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he said unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? So I think last week we ended up talking about the differences in a lot of the different Bibles in the first couple verses of John chapter 5. How when they removed some key words, you didn't really understand the story. But the context of the story is Jesus walked into the temple, walked into an area, and there was a garden there, and it had a little pool in it, and an angel would come down and trouble the waters. And then when an angel came down and troubled the waters, then whoever was first into the pool would be cured of whatever infirmities they'd had. And so what's happening here is he's walking in there, and he comes across a certain man, and this is verse 5, and it says he's been there. He was a certain man which had an infirmity 38 years, and he's going, and he asks him a question: Wilt thou be made whole? Let's go ahead and read verse 7 along with that too. The impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me in the pool, but while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. So Jesus approaches the man and asks if he wishes to be healed. And the answer is obviously yes. I mean, there's a reason he's standing by the pool, right? There's a reason he's there. He obviously wants to be healed. He obviously needs that help. And said he would love to be healed, right? He just didn't have the means to get into the pool fast enough. Every time the angel of verse 4 would come down and trouble the water, somebody else would get into the pool before him, and he couldn't get there. And if you didn't have those verses, like I said last week, that talks about how the angel came down and troubled the water, right? And then you wouldn't understand what he's talking about. You have to have those verses in there. So in verses 8 and 9, Jesus says unto them, Rise, take up thy bed and walk. And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. On the same day was the Sabbath. Now this is important because he approached the man. That the whole thing about the Sabbath is important. That's going to come into play here in just a few minutes. But Jesus approached the man who had no hope of getting healed. He had no hope of being healed. He would try, and nothing would suffice. He couldn't get close enough to the water. He couldn't stay close enough to the water. By the time he had realized the water was troubled, somebody else was already in there. He had no hope, and that's a good picture for us. He went to a man who had no hope, and he healed him, and he gave him the hope, right? So he had no hope of getting healed, and he healed him, and then that's a picture of our salvation, because he had no chance of doing it himself. Just like we have no chance of doing these things of ourselves. We can try as we might, it's just never going to work, right? We can never get to that pool fast enough. That's a picture of us trying to work out our salvation. That's what God sees when he looks at us trying to work for our salvation. He sees a little bit of troubled water, and he sees a bunch of us frantically running towards it, looking like fools, right? And of course, we can never get there fast enough. He had no chance of doing it by himself, and neither do we. I in and of myself, have no chance of earning my salvation. God, by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, has already done that. We don't have to worry about those things. He told the man, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. and he was healed. And he was made whole, and this happened on a Sabbath. And the whole conversation probably took less than 30 seconds. This whole conversation probably took, at most, probably a minute. Hey, sir, do you want to be healed? Oh, I'd love to be healed, but every time the angel troubles the water, I can't get there fast enough. Do you want to be healed? Oh, sir, I want to be healed more than anything. All right, then grab your stuff and let's go. And then he grabbed his stuff and he got up and walked away. That's how the whole conversation went. It's not this big fanfare, hey, everybody come over here, look, see what's going to happen. Come on, everybody. That's not the way Jesus did things, right? He walked up to a man who had no hope of being saved, no hope of being healed. And he says, and he had a personal conversation with him. Do you see where I'm getting at? This is the way God works today in our lives. He deals with us one-on-one. He deals with us as an individual. And the whole conversation probably took no more than a minute. And he responded properly to what God was asking him. He responded properly to what God was offering. And he was healed. And in verse 10 he says, the Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, it is the Sabbath day. It is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. Now this is interesting. There were no Pharisees or Sadducees there, which is kind of a rare thing whenever Jesus came into town. They kind of had tabs on him. They knew where he was, right? And there was no Pharisees or Sadducees there. But when they found out that this poor man had just been healed, there was no question of, well, who healed you and how did he heal you and what was going on? Who was it? By what power did he say he healed you? Any of that stuff. You know what they said? Well, why are you carrying your stuff around? It's unlawful for you to do so. That's the typical mindset of the Pharisee. This is the mindset of the Pharisee who's so legalistic and so dogmatic about chopping every little bit of this into little bitty pieces to make sure that they fit into the box that God has checked, right? That they can't see the forest for the trees in spite of the trees. They can't. They don't understand what's going on. They're worried about this guy taking up his bed and walking when he was just healed miraculously. Yeah, it's not like they all knew who he was. Anybody who walked by that pool knew who that man was. He'd been there forever trying to get healed. And that's just, it's the typical mindset. They gave him trouble because he took up his bed and walked. Now, if that was me, and they would have accused me of that, and I was like, that's the last thing I'm worried about right now. If Jesus healed him on the Sabbath day and says, take up your bed and walk, what was he supposed to say? Well, I'm sorry, but I can't. I have to sit here for a whole nother day. I've been lame for 38 years, and I hadn't been able to walk for 38 years, but since the Pharisees say it's a Sabbath day, then I guess I'll have to sit here for another day before I can grab my stuff and get out of here. Jesus would have had a real good laugh about that. I think Jesus would have had a laugh about that because of the nonsense. That's the legalistic, stereotypical Pharisaic mindset. And that is not lost today. We still have those Pharisaical mindsets in the churches today. They're all over the place. I mean, especially when you get into the realm of controversial topics such as marriage, divorce, and remarriage. There's some controversial things that go on there and beliefs that go on in there. And it's not really controversial if you look what the Scripture says, but when you have a Pharisaical mindset, then people get upset about things. Kind of like I'm not of the typical Baptist mindset. I'm a Baptist through and through, but I'm of the mindset that I don't have a problem with a woman standing right here and giving a lesson. By that meaning giving what God has put on her heart for something. So most Baptist churches, if they were to like that 5-minute preaching that we're going to be doing for the baptism, or not the baptism, but the 5-minute preaching we're going to be doing for the homecoming, right? If a lady wants to get up here and minister unto us, I have no problem with that. It's not like she's putting herself in a position of authority over us. She's not. If she, look, just there's women in the Bible that God used. I mean, there was prophetesses. Why? Because God used them, right? There was judges. There was a judge that was a woman, right? And I'm not saying this that she can be a preacher, not at all. But if I were to tell some pastors that, well, we had a little 5-minute preaching, and then we let this lady come up and give a testimony and some things, they would get all upset about that. Oh, where does it say in the Bible that she can't speak in the church? It doesn't. But, let the woman be silent in the church. Well, that's because you're not rightly dividing. That's about tongues. It's not about ministering, right? She's not called to be a pastor. But every person in this room is called to preach. Every person in this room is called to preach. What are you called to preach? The glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. You're called to preach the gospel of Christ to somebody, right? So I have no problem. Now, I'm not going to give her my pulpit for the hour. That's just not the way it is. But do you see? But the typical Pharisaical mindset is, blasphemy, blasphemy. Well, it's still in the churches today. And just because Jesus is gone doesn't mean the mindset of the Pharisees is gone. So there was no mention of healing by the Pharisees. What happened? I thought you were lame. I thought you couldn't walk. I thought you had an infirmity for most of your life. Well, I did. Well, then why are you taking up your bed and walking? It's a Sabbath. It's just that typical arrogant, Pharisaical, legalistic mindset that Jesus despised. Jesus despised that attitude. As a matter of fact, almost every time he had a conversation with the Pharisees, the Pharisaical mindset came up. Because what were they trying to do? They were trying to trap him. They were trying to make him out to be something that he wasn't, right? And they would try to catch him in his words. They would try to catch him on his doctrine. They would try to catch him on his deity. They tried to catch him on all sorts of things. We're going to see how they tried to catch him on his deity later on in the book of John, John chapter 5 and John chapter 6. But this conversation took just a few minutes, and something miraculous happened. And instead of acknowledging the miracle that was standing before them, they ran to their religious Pharisaical mindset. All right, verse 11 and verse 12. He answered them, "He that made me whole, he said unto me, take up thy bed and walk," which is a logical answer. And they asked him, "What man is that which said unto thee, take up thy bed and walk?" So the formerly lame man told them that a man healed him and told him to go home. Get out of here. You don't need to stand by this pool anymore. You're saved. You don't have to worry. You don't have to stand here and get wet every time you sin. You see what I'm getting at? You don't have to stand here and do this again every time you sin. You're saved. You're no longer lame. You're made whole. Okay? Go along your way. So he told the Pharisees this, and then they really began to get upset. Why in the world would they get upset that somebody was healed? That doesn't make any sense. That's what they should be looking for, right? That's one of the signs of the Messiah that they were told they need to look for. That's one evidence of a Messiah, of the prophet, the one that's supposed to be coming. They all know who Jesus was by this time. They all knew who Jesus was by his first public miracle. They already knew who he was. We have an evidence of him being a young man in the temple and astounding them, right, with his doctrine and in his teachings. He astounded the lawyers and the people of his day. They all knew who he was, and that's not the only trip he ever made into Jerusalem. He made it. Mary and Joseph were faithful to come to the feasts. They were, especially the Passover, right? They were faithful for that, and he was there every year. And that's not the only time he ever met one of those. I promise, it's not the only time. That's the only time we have recorded. But we know they knew who he was, right? So by the time he's here in John chapter 5, they asked, well, who was it that did this to you? Who was it that told you to take up your bed and walk? Who dare give you that order to take up your bed and walk? And who dare heal you on a Sabbath day? I mean, that boggles my mind that they would say things like that, right? But this is what happens when you fall away. This is what happens when you're in apostasy. You get so stuck in your own convictions. You get so stuck in false doctrine. You get so stuck in that religious rut of a mindset that you can't understand what grace is. When you see grace happening, you get upset about it. When you see mercy, you get upset about it. Well, you shouldn't give them a third or fourth or fifth chance. Why not? God gave me that many chances. God gave me way more chances than that. Why are you upset that I'm showing mercy and grace onto somebody? That's a Pharisaical mindset. Well, he didn't do what he said he was going to do. Well, he lies. Oh, he did this to us. And yeah, you know what? And there's going to come a time where we're going to have to part ways from that person. But how about we show a little grace until then? That legalistic, Pharisaical, that's a fleshly mindset. That's what it is. It's a fleshly mindset. And the Pharisees reveled and lived in that. And that's what they were doing. That's why they killed Jesus. So it was his kingdom he was coming for, right? Well, they didn't want to give up his king. They didn't want to give up that kingdom. And that's what it was. It's a Pharisaical, legalistic mindset. They're stuck in religion. And I said it this morning, but I don't have a religion. My faith tells me that I'm supposed to have grace unto people. My faith tells me I'm supposed to have mercy unto people. So if I show somebody grace and mercy, then I show somebody grace and mercy. And the doctrine, and the legalistic way of looking at things need not get in the way. Because God is gracious and merciful towards me, a sinner. Has he not been good to each and every one of us? Brother Charles, has not God showed you grace? Has not God showed you mercy? He has. He showed all of us grace. Has he shown you grace and mercy in your life? He's shown me grace and mercy in my life. Has he shown you grace and mercy in your life? He's shown me grace and mercy in my lifetime. So why can't I show others grace and mercy? Right? Verse, where are we at here? 13. Verse 13. And he that was healed wist not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. You know what Jesus did? After that whole 1-minute conversation happened, he says, all right, get your stuff. Get on out of here. You don't need to be by this pool. He took off. I mean, he was gone. He didn't stick around. You know what was going to happen? Once people realized that he was healing lame men by the pool, he realized what was going to happen. He realized he was getting ready to be mobbed, right? So he gradually showed his way out the door, and he wanted. I think honestly, it's not that he was running from the Pharisees. He just wanted to get away from that situation before the Pharisees showed up and made a big scene about all this. Now, he just walked off. Well, I've heard some people in commentaries say before that, well, why didn't Jesus stand there and heal everybody by the pool? That's a logical question, isn't it? It is. And the answer to that question is not one that most people like. Jesus doesn't heal everybody. He just doesn't. God doesn't work in everybody's life. And this is a picture of him saving a man who had no hope of being healed. This is what this whole picture is. And if he walked around and saved everybody, it'd be like Oprah. You get salvation, and you get salvation, and you get salvation, and you get salvation, and you get salvation. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it works. There was a mob around Jesus Christ begging him for him to be healed. And some lady crawled underneath all of them and just touched the hem of his garment. Do you think he didn't know she was there? He knew. And as soon as he touched the hem of his garment, he healed her. It wasn't just by proxy. Oh, I just got healed because I just got close to Jesus. Jesus actively chose to heal that lady. Well, what about all those people that were around him? How come he didn't heal each and every one of them? That's not the way it works. God works individually in your life. He doesn't always give you the healing that you want. He doesn't always answer those prayers, does he? There's one prayer he'll always answer. Lord, save me. There's one prayer that he'll always answer. Lord, save me. Right? The prayer for salvation. He'll always hear it. He'll always answer it. Apart from that, God works in ways that I just sometimes don't understand. There's that saying, God works in mysterious ways. That's partially true. He works in mysterious ways only because we don't have the mind like him. If we were to think like Christ, then it wouldn't be mysterious at all. If we were to have a godly mindset, it wouldn't be mysterious at all. But since we don't have that godly mindset, we have an earthly mindset, then things seem weird and odd to us. But God doesn't always heal. God doesn't always answer your prayer. Sometimes him not answering your prayer is the best thing for you. He told Paul 3 times, I am not healing you. I am not healing you. I'm not healing you. Stop asking. And Paul stopped asking. So why? Because Paul needed that infirmity. He goes on later in that chapter to say, I need that infirmity so it'll keep me humble and it'll keep me where I'm supposed to be. Because if I don't, I'll end up with that Pharisaical mindset. Look what God has shown me. Right? But he needed that thorn in his flesh. Right? And it truly amazes me that Jesus healed this man and then just moved on, and not even a mention of who he was. He didn't say, hey, go tell everybody Jesus healed you. The guy didn't even know the man's name that healed him. He just says, I don't know who it was. This guy came in, he had a couple people with him, and he said, hey, do you want to be healed? And I said, yeah. And he says, well, then get up, let's go. He grabbed my hand, and he picked me up. And I was able to get up. I don't know how he did it, but that's how it happened. That's what he did. And they really started to get upset, and they really started to ask more questions because it was the Sabbath. And he didn't even mention who he was, and he quickly and quietly removed himself from that place before a huge multitude had figured out what had happened, and a crowd began to gather. And that reminds me, no faith healer in the world today would go by this model. No faith healer today would go by the model that Jesus Christ went to. Jesus Christ went to the sick. It's not like he accidentally walked into this little courtyard. He walked into this courtyard and he picked out a man and he healed him, and then he left. No faith healer would ever do that. The faith healer would be, if you're sick, come to me and pay the admissions, and then I'll give you a blessing. If your faith is good enough. You ever hear those people who don't get healed by a faith healer? You know what the excuse of the faith healer is? Oh, your faith must be lacking. Your faith must be lacking. It's never the faith of the person that gets healed that's lacking. In the scripture, it's never the faith of the person who gets healed. There's people who don't have the faith, but he heals them. There's no mention of this guy having faith. None whatsoever. But he got healed. So was it his faith that healed him? Or was it the faith of Jesus that healed him? It was the faith of the person doing the healing. So if a faith healer were trying to heal somebody and he says, oh, well, it must not have worked because your faith was lacking. It's not his faith that's lacking. It's your faith that's lacking, the healer. How come if someone really did have the ability to heal, if God gave me the ability to heal people, first place I'd do is find a children's cancer ward. Little kids with cancer break my heart. And not a one of them would be left in that bed by the time I got done. That's me, right? That's what I would do if God gave me the ability to heal sickness and infirmities. Little kids that are sick just break my heart, right? So yeah, that's where I'd go first thing. And then I wouldn't have to advertise. They would all come to me just like they did to Jesus, right? But they never do that. They never do that. They never heal and then quietly walk away. They always want to make a name for themselves and make sure that money's involved with it. So there's a man named Morris Hartman who taught me how to do some muscle therapies and stuff like that. And since he technically isn't a medical doctor and he doesn't have the ability to have a practice, he cannot charge for his services. right? He doesn't have a license to practice medicine. So you know what he does? He puts a little tip jar right up there, and he says, tips are welcome. And he works on people for absolutely nothing, for free. He works on people for free. Schedule, make an appointment, come on in. Your tips are greatly appreciated. He doesn't have a problem with money. You want to know why? Because he's good at what he does, and God has given him the gift of healing, not in an apostolic type healing, but he's given him the gift that's talking, one of the gifts that is talking about in the Corinthians, that talks about how he knows how to use the body in order to heal itself, and he knows how to use medicines and medicinal purpose, herbs and all these things to heal, and he's very good at what he does. And he doesn't charge anybody a cotton-picking thing. And I tell you what, he says, I never have to worry about someone who's hurting and then they walk out feeling good giving me money. If you help them, they're going to give you money. They're willing to part with their money when it comes to their health. And he says, I don't demand any money, ever, for any of that stuff. Now, why don't these faith healers ever take that model, take that approach? I'll heal you. What's it going to cost me? Absolutely nothing. Look, if Jesus was healing, if Jesus walked into a children's cancer ward right now and healed up all them kids, you know how much money the mom and dad would throw at him? Here, take everything I got. Take everything I got. You saved my baby. He'd be a multimillionaire in a heartbeat, and he wouldn't even have to try. And it's never about the money. Never about the money. Jesus had no earthly use for money. When they tried to trap him in the whole money thing about the whole taxes, he told one of his disciples to go out fishing. And when cast it out there. You're only going to need one hook. Cast it out there. That's real faith. Go out fishing with only one hook, right? That's real faith. You go out there, and the first fish he caught, and he says, look in his mouth, and you'll find a coin. Give that to Caesar. That's his. He had no earthly use for money. They were walking around with a huge crowd around them, and they go, hey, it's about supper time. How are we going to feed all these people? And the disciples were worried. How are we going to afford all this? And he's just like, isn't there a kid around? He's got a basket with some fish in it. I think I remember talking to him just a few minutes ago. Go find that kid. He didn't need money. But we won't ever take that model. No human will ever take that model of healing somebody and just getting out of the way. So, and it truly amazes me that he did that, right? How he just kind of very meekly and very quietly exited stage left. All right, verse 14. Afterward, Jesus findeth him in the temple. So Jesus sought this man out and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole, sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon thee. Oh boy. How would you like to hear that? The man who just says, hey, get up. Come on, get up. Well, I can't. I'm lame. He says, no, get up. And he get up. And he's healed. And he done something miraculous. You know there's something special about that man. You know he's got a power. You know he's got authority, right? And then he comes to him and says something very politically incorrect to him. Yet spiritually true. It's politically incorrect, but spiritually true. He implies that this man was impotent because of his sin. That's not a message people want to hear. But he implies he was lame. He had an infirmity for 38 years. He had this infirmity because of his sin, right? Even in his crippled state, Jesus sees that he's a sinner. We tend to look upon those people who are downtrodden and hurt and lame, and we try to treat them differently. They're still sinners. Are they not? They have a soul that needs saved, don't they? Absolutely. Right? He still says he's a sinner. He says, lest a worse thing come unto thee, right? There's earthly consequences for sin. There's spiritual consequences for sin. But there's also physical consequences for sin. I mean, we see it all the time. People get sick, and people the chain smoker has been smoking their entire life, right? What happens? They have to have part of their esophagus removed, and they have cancer, and they have all this stuff. The Bible tells you not to put those things in your body. Now, it doesn't specifically say cigarettes, but it tells you not to put those some things that are harmful inside of you. And if you continually do that to the temple, what happens to the temple? It's going to break down, right? Those are consequences. Those are physical consequences for an earthly sin. But there's also spiritual consequences for sin too, right? Sometimes people get away with sin their whole life and never have to deal with it on this earth. They deal with it later. It's accounted, I promise. Jesus Christ is a very, very good bookkeeper. He doesn't lose accounts. He doesn't mismark things. He doesn't put things in the wrong column. If something is sin, it's a sin, it's a sin, it's a sin, it's a sin. And you're going to account for that either here on this earth or in heaven or hell, right? Whether that's a loss of rewards, whether that's a loss of an inheritance, not the loss of the salvation, the loss of the inheritance, right? Or if you're not saved, then you're going to deal with that in hell, right? So that's a concept that people don't like to really think about. Well, why is things going wrong in my life? God's just not listening. Are you sure it's God not listening, or do you have some sin that God's trying to open your eyes to? I mean, I don't know that answer. Sometimes I don't even know that answer in my own life until He opens my eyes to it, right? The problem with deception is you don't realize you're deceived until after you come to the realization you've been deceived, right? So when God brings something to light, it's important, right? And until He opens your eyes on some things, sometimes we don't get them right. So He tells this man, hey, if you go back to the way you were, far worse is going to happen to you. And that's not something that's politically correct. We don't like to think about consequences for sin. Well, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven. There's still consequences for sin. Still consequences for sin. If you got a problem with putting things in front of your eyes you shouldn't be looking at, then you're probably going to have problems with your marriage. Just saying, right? If you got a problem with the bottle, you're probably going to have problems both in your health and in your relationship with others. There's consequences for sin. Right? That's just the way it is. All right, verse 15. And the man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole. I don't understand this either. I'm not sure why this happens. But we don't know if Jesus sought him out or if the Jews sought him out or if he ran to the Jews. But after Jesus healed him and told him this, the next verse says he was speaking to the Jews about who this man was. Like he got information. This guy came to me and he told me his name was Jesus. I don't know if the man just healed me like that, even if he said something that I didn't like about, hey, the sin. Even if he said something to me about the sin, about, hey, you keep away from that stuff, or be careful you don't sin anymore, otherwise worse is going to happen to you. Even if he said that to me, I don't think I would go run and rat himself out to his enemies. Rat him out to the enemies. Why? He just healed me. But I don't know if there was anything malicious here or not. It just says the man departed and told the Jews. So we don't really know his intent. We don't really know how it happened or why it happened, but it happened. But he ran and told, tattletaled on Jesus, I guess, for healing him on the Sabbath. And therefore, verse 16, did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him because he had done things on the Sabbath day. Here it is. The typical response. No reference to the great work that was done. No reference to the deity of Christ. No reference to the miracle. No mention of how Jesus was able to heal. Just legalistic religious garbage. That's all it was. Verse 17, but Jesus answered them, my Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Now, hitherto means up until this point, or up to a point, right? Beforehand. Things that had happened up to a point, right? Hitherto. My Father had worked hitherto. My Father has worked up until now. And this is what really burns the clutch plate on. I mean, this really gets the Jews right here, right? And he says, but now I'm working. Oh boy. They were already coming after him, right? My Father worked until now, now I work. This is a claim of deity by Jesus Christ. This is him saying, God's taking a break. I'm doing it now. Now, that's not necessarily true how I phrase that. But up in the mind of the Pharisees, God had worked in the nation of Israel, right? So when he says, my Father had worked hitherto, now I work, and I work, right? He's equating himself with God. And they're not happy about that, right? You ever hear somebody say that Jesus never claimed to be God or never claimed to be God's son? I chuckle whenever I hear that. I hear that. I hear, well, you know, the thing about Jesus is he never really claimed to be God. What are you reading? It's all over the place. Well, he never claimed to be God's son. That's all over the place too, right? And this is exactly one of the things that he's saying here. What the problem is, they don't understand English. They don't understand the cultural references that Jesus was referring to. He's saying, my Father worked with the nation of Israel up until now, and I'm working now. Now I'm working with you. The reason I healed that man is because I'm doing the work my Father he sent me to do. And he's going to say that here in just a minute. But I don't understand how anybody can make that claim and have read the Bible. If they've ever read just the Gospel of John, if you've ever read just the Gospel of John, there is no way you cannot see it unless you don't want to see it. It's there. It's all over the place, right? He absolutely did. He did right here. Well, preacher, it doesn't really say that. Well, the next verse really shows that they completely understood what he was saying. Okay, but another example of him claiming to be a deity is found in Luke chapter 20. Do you remember the parable of the husbandman? Right? The parable of the husbandman. The parable of the husbandman was they sent the husbandman, the owner of the vineyard sent some husbandmen out to the vineyard, and they killed the husbandman. Right? They killed those people that he had sent out there. So then eventually sent his son there to work and to get control of things, and they killed his son, thinking that they were going to, if they killed everybody, then they could just have the vineyard. It was going to be theirs. Do you guys remember that story? It's in Luke chapter 20, right? They killed the people in the vineyard, and then the son's owner, so they can claim the vineyard, it says, as their own, right? Now, Jesus said that the husbandman Jesus said that the husbandman would be killed and that the vineyard would be given to someone else completely, right? That's what Jesus said in response to the parable. Well, the Pharisees knew. The Pharisees' response to that phrase was, God forbid. Why? They knew they were the husbandmen in the story. They understood what Jesus was saying. They were not outraged at the death of the vineyard of the owner's son. They weren't outraged at the innocent death. They weren't outraged at the innocent death of the workers, right, that they had killed initially. They weren't outraged at the loss of life for any of those things. What were they outraged at? They were outraged that something that they thought was theirs was not going to be given to them. That's what they were outraged at. They were worried about the husbandman because they knew they were the husbandmen in the parable. They wanted to kill the Messiah. At this point, already, what was this, Luke chapter 20? By Luke chapter 20, they knew they were going to kill Jesus. They knew it. They wanted to kill the Messiah so they can take the kingdom for themselves. So what did Jesus do? He told them a parable. And he made them the guys that he says, even if you kill the son of the owner, you're all going to be killed and it's going to be given to somebody else. Well, who's the somebody else? The Gentiles. Us. Me. I got in on it because of what they did. And if he would have said that word Gentiles, oh man. Every time Jesus said that word Gentiles, it set him off on a tizzy. He didn't say it here in Luke chapter 20, but if he would have, man, he says that it's just going to be given to somebody else. They probably knew by this time who he was talking about because they tried to kill him here too. in Luke chapter 20. Right? So in verse 17, he was saying, my Father works up to now. He doesn't say the Father stops working, but he does say, now I work, and I work, right? I'm working too, right? Equating himself with God. And in verse 18, they understood it because it says, therefore the Jews sought more to kill him because he had not only broken the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Don't tell me that they didn't understand what he was saying. They come right out and say it right there. They understood what he was saying. He says, I am God. I am equal with God, and he is my Father, and I am his Son. So while silly Bible critics today will tell you that Jesus never claimed to be God's Son, the Pharisees knew, and they even say it. The Pharisees knew, and they even say it. All right, that's all we have time for tonight. I apologize. We had some stuff going on earlier that was good to see the kids in the youth camp, and that is just how many pictures was that? That was 118 pictures, but how many pictures did we actually get from the youth camp? Something like 1,200 pictures. Something like that, 1,200 pictures. So we sorted through there and picked out the ones that pertained to this church. But there was 1,200 pictures and videos taken at the youth camp. So Miss Wendy put a lot of work into that. So, all right. Any questions or comments? No? All right. Dear Lord, thank you for this blessed day. I pray that you help us to understand what these things are happening in the Gospel of John. Help us to bring it to light to us. Help us to have some wisdom when it comes to your words and how to not have that Pharisaical mindset and not have that legalistic religious garbage that gets stuck in our head. Lord, help us to rid ourselves of that filth and have some grace to each other and have some mercy. Lord, help us to live the way you want us to live, and help us to not be trapped in that religion, but help us to have faith, Lord. Lord, I need you to help increase my faith. Right? I pray that you be with each and every one of these people. Bless them, guide them, put a hedge of protection around them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.